You don't get it, do you? This isn't just about Easter egg hunts and baskets. This day means something. It was a bright, crisp Easter morning in New York City. The streets of Harlem were lined with colorful decorations for the holiday, pastel eggs, vibrant flowers, and baskets filled with treats. The air was filled with excitement as families gathered for the annual Easter egg hunt at Marcus Garvey Park, a tradition that had become a staple in the community. The park was alive with laughter, music, and the buzz of children running around, eager to collect as many eggs as they could. Among the crowd was a group of well-dressed white families who had traveled from various parts of the city to join the festivities. For them, it was an opportunity to celebrate a cherished holiday in one of New York's most iconic neighborhoods. They were excited, but perhaps a little naive, unaware of the deep cultural significance this holiday held for the people of Harlem. As the families set up their picnic blankets and prepared for the egg hunt, one family in particular stood out. They had come with extravagant baskets, brightly colored, almost garish in their design. Each basket was filled with over-the-top decorations, from gold ribbons to oversized glittering eggs. While these baskets might have been the norm in other parts of the city, they felt out of place here in Harlem. They were a stark contrast to the more humble, traditional baskets that many of the black families had brought with them. For Marcus, a local teacher and lifelong resident of Harlem, it didn't sit right. He stood on the edge of the crowd, his eyes scanning the scene. He noticed the group of white families laughing and enjoying themselves, their baskets in sharp contrast to those of his friends and neighbors. To him, it felt like an appropriation, a commercialization of something that had always been deeply personal and rooted in the struggles of their community. He watched as one of the children from the white families tossed their eggs carelessly onto the grass, treating the moment as a game, not understanding the cultural weight behind it. His anger simmered, but it wasn't just the baskets. It was the lack of understanding, the assumption that this was just another holiday to be celebrated without truly respecting its roots. It wasn't long before Marcus's frustration began to boil over. He couldn't help but feel that the joyful celebration was being overshadowed by a sense of exclusion, and his mind raced with the question, why wasn't this day about more than just the surface-level excitement? Why were they ignoring the deeper meaning of the holiday, the one that connected generations of Harlem's black community? The tension was rising, though no one could yet see the storm brewing just beneath the surface. Marcus couldn't shake the frustration building inside him as he watched the families from out of town enjoying their Easter without any real understanding of its significance. He had grown up in Harlem, where holidays like Easter were about more than just colorful eggs and candy. It was about community, history, and resilience. The people of Harlem celebrated with a quiet pride, remembering generations of struggle and perseverance. But to these outsiders, it seemed like just another festive occasion, a moment for playful games and extravagant decorations that lacked any deeper meaning. Marcus stood near the edge of the gathering, his arms crossed, watching the white families around him. One child in particular caught his attention. She was no more than 10, with her blonde hair tied up in a perfect bow, her face lit up with excitement as she tossed eggs around, laughing with abandon. To her, this was nothing more than a fun tradition, a playful break from the school year. But to Marcus, it was a stark reminder of how disconnected so many people were from the reality of those who had fought to survive in neighborhoods like Harlem. His heart sank as he watched the adults in the white families, oblivious to the subtle tension in the air. They were too caught up in the spectacle, the joy of the hunt, to notice the unspoken discomfort of the black families who had been there for years. The contrast felt jarring to Marcus. Here they were, celebrating something that wasn't truly theirs, while the true essence of the holiday, the spiritual significance, seemed lost. The clinking of the shiny, over-decorated baskets against the pavement grew louder in his ears, almost drowning out the familiar hum of community voices he had always cherished. Finally, unable to contain himself any longer, Marcus walked up to one of the white families. He wasn't sure why he chose them, but something about the child's carefree disregard for the significance of the day set him off. "Hey," Marcus called, his voice firm but steady. The woman, a middle-aged mother with a friendly smile, turned around, raising an eyebrow at him. "Is there a problem?" she asked, her tone carrying the subtle hint of confusion. "You don't get it, do you?" Marcus replied, his words sharp now. "This isn't just about Easter egg hunts and baskets. This day means something. It's a moment of remembrance for our people, for the struggles we've endured. And yet here you are, turning it into a consumerist game, treating it like it's just another event to be checked off your list. The woman blinked, clearly taken aback. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Behind her husband had begun to notice the exchange, his brows furrowed as he stepped toward Marcus. "You're being a bit harsh," he said, his tone defensive. "We just came here to celebrate with our kids." "What's wrong with that?" Marcus shook his head, a mixture of anger and disappointment welling up inside him. "It's not about what you're doing. It's about what you're missing. You don't understand how we see this day. You don't get the pain, the sacrifice, the history that's embedded in it, and that's what hurts." The man was silent now, his face hardening as the weight of Marcus's words began to sink in. Marcus could see that they weren't fully processing the depth of what he was saying. He could feel the gap between their worlds, the divide that had always existed, only now it seemed to be more pronounced, more evident. As the argument continued to unfold, a few more members of the White families gathered around, some looking uncomfortable, others trying to step in and calm things down. But the damage had been done. The carefree atmosphere that had once surrounded the park now felt heavy, as if the joy of the day had been shattered. The Black families who had been enjoying the event were now noticeably distant, some turning away, while others exchanged glances, their discomfort palpable. Marcus didn't want to ruin the day for anyone, but it seemed as though the tension couldn't be avoided any longer. The laughter and joy that had filled the air now felt hollow to him, overshadowed by the deep-rooted issues of cultural appropriation and misunderstanding. As the crowd began to thin out and the egg hunt wound down, Marcus stood there, his fists clenched by his sides. He had said what he needed to say, but it felt like it wasn't enough. The divide between the two communities was too vast, too entrenched in centuries of history. What bothered him the most was that no matter how many times they tried to educate others, it always seemed like the lesson never truly landed. The day was supposed to be about renewal, about rebirth. But for Marcus, it felt like yet another reminder of how far they still had to go. As the argument between Marcus and the White family simmered, the air in the park became thick with tension. People started to whisper, casting sideways glances at one another, unsure of what to do or say. For a moment, it felt as though the unity the holiday usually brought had been shattered, as if the joy of Easter had been stolen away by a stark, painful reminder of the deep divide still present in the city. Marcus felt the weight of those stares, the eyes of the onlookers, the uncomfortable glances exchanged between the groups. It was as if the city of New York itself was watching this confrontation unfold. And yet, just when he thought the situation might spiral further, a soft voice called out from behind him. "Marcus, hold on a second," it said, calm but firm. He turned to find Evelyn, an older woman from the neighborhood, walking toward him. Evelyn had been a part of Harlem's community for as long as Marcus could remember. Her wisdom and presence had always been a steady force in the community. She was one of the elders who had seen it all, who had lived through the highs and lows of Harlem's history. As she approached him, she gave him a gentle smile, her face etched with both kindness and understanding. "Let's not let this ruin what we've worked so hard for," she said quietly, her hand resting gently on his shoulder. Marcus took a deep breath, his anger still simmering, but slowly beginning to calm. He knew Evelyn's words were not just for him, they were for everyone around them. She was the voice of reason, the anchor in a storm of emotions. He nodded slowly, stepping back from the confrontation with the White families. Evelyn turned to face them, her eyes scanning the group. "I understand your confusion," she said, her voice gentle but authoritative, "and I can see that this day has turned into something you didn't expect. But sometimes it takes a little understanding, a little empathy, to bridge the gap between us. I want to ask you all something. Have you ever stopped to ask yourselves what this day means to those of us who've lived here, who've fought for everything we have?" There was a pause as Evelyn's words hung in the air, and the White families, who had been defensive just moments before, looked at one another uncertain. She continued, "Easter is more than just a holiday for us. It's a symbol of resurrection, of rising from hardship, of finding strength through adversity. For Harlem, it's not just about eggs and candy. It's about remembering our ancestors, the struggles they went through, and the resilience they showed. We celebrate this day not just with our families, but with our history. Evelyn's words seemed to break through the tension like a soft breeze cutting through a storm. Marcus felt his body relax slightly as he listened to her, the fire in his chest slowly cooling. The White families looked at each other, their expressions softening, as if the weight of Evelyn's message was beginning to settle in. The woman who had first spoken to Marcus stepped forward, her eyes filled with a mixture of remorse and reflection. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice small but sincere. "I didn't understand. I was caught up in what I thought Easter was about for us, but now I see it's much deeper than that for you." The apology wasn't perfect, but it was a start. And for Marcus, it was enough. Evelyn smiled warmly, giving her a nod of understanding. "Thank you," she said, her voice calm. "This isn't about pointing fingers. It's about learning from each other, and it's about recognizing that we're all part of this community. We may come from different places, but we all have something to offer." The group stood in silence for a moment, and then slowly, tentatively, the tension began to melt away. The White families apologized again, not just to Marcus, but to those nearby who had witnessed the exchange. Marcus looked around, noticing that the rest of the park, which had once been filled with apprehension, was now slowly returning to its earlier joy. Laughter began to fill the air again, and the children, now more aware of the meaning behind the day, began to play together, exchanging eggs and smiles. Marcus couldn't help but smile as well. He turned to Evelyn, grateful for her wisdom, for her gentle intervention that had turned the day around. As they watched the children running, playing, and learning, Marcus realized that this Easter wasn't a day marked by division, but by a lesson learned, a small step toward understanding. The park had transformed once more, not just in its decorations, but in the hearts of its people. And in that moment, Marcus knew that this Easter, despite its rocky start, had fulfilled its true purpose, bringing the community together in a way he hadn't expected. As the day progressed, the park gradually returned to its former vibrant energy. The tension that had once clouded the air was slowly lifting, replaced by a more profound sense of reflection. The exchange between Marcus and the White families, followed by Evelyn's wise intervention, had left everyone with something to think about. It wasn't just about the eggs, the baskets, or the games anymore. It was about something deeper, the shared humanity that connected them all. Marcus walked away from the crowd, his thoughts swirling, not entirely at peace, but no longer consumed by anger. He stood by the edge of the park, watching the children play and laugh, their earlier ignorance of the holiday's true significance now replaced by a newfound understanding. He saw one of the white children, a little girl, walking toward him with a basket of colorful eggs in her hands. She stopped in front of him, her eyes wide with curiosity. "Mister," she said hesitantly, "I'm sorry for what happened. My mom said that I should ask you if I can share some of my eggs with you." The simple sincerity in her voice caught Marcus off guard. This wasn't an adult trying to make amends, but a child who had witnessed the divide and now wanted to bridge it in her own way. It was a small gesture, but in that moment, it felt like everything. Marcus knelt down to her level, his heart softening. "Thank you," he said, accepting the eggs with a genuine smile. "I appreciate that, sweetheart." The girl beamed, her face lighting up as she handed him the basket before running back to her friends, eager to share her newfound lesson with them. Marcus stood there for a moment, holding the small basket of eggs, looking out over the park. The significance of the day, of Easter, had not been lost on him, but now he saw it in a different light. It was not just about challenging the ignorance of others. It was about helping them see the world from a new perspective. Evelyn's words had lingered in his mind, reminding him that progress wasn't always instantaneous. Change, especially in a place like Harlem, took time. It took patience, understanding, and a willingness to listen. He thought about the generations of families who had lived here, fought here, struggled here, and how, despite it all, they had kept their dignity and strength intact. That was the true meaning of Easter. It wasn't just about celebrating resurrection and renewal on a religious level. It was about the resurrection of the spirit in the face of adversity, the renewal of hope even when the odds seemed impossible. As Marcus stood, still holding the small basket, Evelyn walked over to him, her eyes filled with quiet pride. "You did well today," she said softly. "You spoke your truth and you helped others understand. but now you have to let it go. This holiday, this community, it's about moving forward together. Marcus nodded, his gaze drifting back to the park. I just don't want it to be forgotten, he said quietly. I don't want them to only see the holiday as something to be celebrated without understanding the weight it carries for us. Evelyn placed a hand gently on his shoulder. They won't forget, she said, and you're helping them remember, piece by piece, moment by moment. That's how change happens, Marcus. You plant seeds. Some take root, some don't, but the ones that do, they'll grow. She paused for a moment, looking at the children laughing together regardless of their differences. Maybe this year, the holiday took on a new meaning for all of us. Maybe next year, it'll mean even more. The words settled in Marcus's heart like a quiet promise. He wasn't expecting change to happen overnight. But seeing the small acts of kindness, the apologies, the understanding that was slowly blossoming between the groups gave him hope. It was a reminder that no matter how divided they were, there was always room for growth. As the sun began to dip below the skyline, casting long shadows over the park, Marcus knew the work wasn't done. The journey toward true understanding and unity was ongoing, but today had been a small victory. A victory that began with a conversation, a shared moment, and a few humble eggs. And for Marcus, that was enough to keep moving forward. The spirit of Easter, of renewal and rebirth, was alive in that moment, in that park, and in the hearts of everyone who had witnessed the change. It wasn't just about forgiveness, it was about learning, growing, and doing better. And that, he thought, was the true meaning of resurrection. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting a golden glow over the park, the atmosphere began to change. The laughter that had been stifled by earlier tension now returned, but it was different. It was warmer, more genuine. People moved closer to one another, as if the walls between them had dissolved in the wake of the uncomfortable but necessary confrontation. Marcus stood on the sidelines, watching the children from both sides of the park now playing together. There was a sense of harmony in the air that hadn't been there earlier, and though the seeds of discord hadn't completely vanished, they had begun to sprout something far more powerful: understanding. It wasn't just about the words they had exchanged or the apology from the white families. It was about the realization that each of them, no matter their background, had come to this moment carrying their own burdens, their own histories. And in the shared space of Harlem's park, they had the opportunity to put down those burdens, at least for a day, and experience something new. For Marcus, it was a bittersweet feeling. He knew the history of this neighborhood, the countless injustices faced by his ancestors, and the constant battle to be seen and respected in a city that had often turned its back. But today he had seen something different. He had seen people, black and white, come together and break through the barriers of misunderstanding. The work wasn't done, he knew that. It would take more than one Easter celebration to bridge the divide, but this day felt like the start of something. Evelyn had been right. It wasn't about pointing fingers or assigning blame. It was about coming together and seeing each other, really seeing each other for the first time. That's when true change could happen. Later, as the evening settled in and the sky turned from gold to dusky purple, Evelyn gathered the community once more. The families from both sides had found their way toward the large oak tree in the center of the park. Marcus, though still thoughtful, stood with them. He felt a renewed sense of purpose, as though the weight on his shoulders had lifted, if only slightly. Evelyn stood before them, her presence commanding yet full of warmth. She spoke softly, but with a conviction that made every word resonate in the hearts of those listening. Today, she began, we learned something important. We learned that no matter how different we might seem, we share something far more powerful, our humanity. We learned that we can disagree, we can stumble, but we can also grow together. And that's what Easter is about: resurrection, not just of our spirits, but of our connections to one another. Marcus felt a lump form in his throat as Evelyn spoke. He hadn't realized how much he needed to hear those words, how much the people around him, his neighbors, his community, needed to hear them too. It wasn't just about the eggs, the decorations, or even the traditions. It was about understanding the shared history that they were all a part of. Evelyn continued, her voice strong. We don't have to agree on everything, but we must agree on one thing. We are all in this together. So let's continue to learn from each other. Let's keep growing, and most importantly, let's keep respecting each other's stories. As she finished, the crowd, once divided by tension, now stood united in their shared experience. The families that had once been wary of one another now exchanged smiles and nods of acknowledgement. The children, who had earlier been caught in the middle, now ran freely, their laughter filling the air as they handed out Easter eggs to one another. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. Marcus watched it all unfold before him, his heart swelling with pride. He didn't have all the answers, but today had shown him that change could start with a single conversation, with one person being brave enough to say, "This matters. We matter." And that's what Easter had become about. Not just a holiday, but a reminder of the possibilities that could arise when people laid down their differences and chose to connect. By the time the sun had fully set and the park began to empty, the warmth that had been missing earlier hung in the air. The moment of unity, though brief, had left an indelible mark on the hearts of everyone present. Marcus felt a quiet sense of hope as he walked home, the sounds of laughter still echoing in the distance. He knew that this Easter, more than any other, had brought them one step closer to the future they all dreamed of. One where they didn't just coexist, but truly understood and supported one another. It wasn't the end of the journey, but it was a beautiful start. And for Marcus, that was enough. As the evening settled into the familiar chill of early spring, Marcus found himself walking alone through the streets of Harlem, the day's events replaying in his mind like a quiet film. The sounds of the Easter festivities still echoed faintly in the distance, the laughter of children, the soft hum of conversation between families, and the occasional shout of excitement as another egg was found. But even as he walked away from the park, something had shifted inside him. It wasn't just the visible unity he had witnessed in the park. It was something deeper. There was a subtle undercurrent of change that had taken root, one that he knew wouldn't be erased by a single day or by a single conversation, but it was undeniably there. The city, for all its complexity and contradictions, had taken a small step toward understanding. As he passed familiar storefronts and crossed the intersections he had known all his life, Marcus thought about how many times he had walked these streets, always feeling the weight of the divide that existed not just between races, but between histories. Harlem had always been a place of strength, but also a place where the scars of systemic injustice were deeply etched. Yet today something felt different. The people he passed on the street, whether they were black, white, or of another descent, seemed to look at each other a little longer, a little softer. There was an almost imperceptible shift in the way they acknowledged one another. It wasn't grand or overt, but it was real. Marcus couldn't shake the image of the little girl from the white family, her simple apology, and her genuine gesture of sharing her Easter eggs. It was a small thing, perhaps insignificant in the grand scheme of things, but in his heart it represented something vital, a willingness to reach across the divide, to make an effort where none was expected. He thought about Evelyn's words earlier, how she had spoken of resurrection not just as a spiritual concept, but as something more tangible, more immediate. Resurrection wasn't just about an individual's rebirth, it was about the collective. It was about the way a community could rise from its divisions, its misunderstandings, its brokenness, and emerge into something new, something stronger. That was what he had seen today. That was what Easter had given him, an unexpected gift. The park had transformed from a battleground of frustration into a space of healing. Marcus knew it wasn't a perfect resolution, nor would it solve the deep-rooted issues overnight. But for the first time in a long while, he felt the faint stirrings of hope. The city, with all its complexity, with all its layers of history and struggle, was still capable of change. He reached his apartment building, climbing the steps slowly, the quiet weight of the evening settling in his chest. As he stepped inside, he could hear the faint murmur of the television from the next room, but he wasn't in the mood for the noise. Instead, he sat by his window, watching the world outside as the city lights blinked on one by one, reflecting in the wet streets. It was then that he realized something else. The world had kept turning. Life in Harlem, in New York, in the world, didn't stop for moments of conflict. People continued to live, to work, to celebrate. But sometimes in those fleeting moments of connection, of genuine understanding, you saw a glimpse of the possibility for something better. And that was enough. Marcus's mind drifted back to the faces he had seen in the park, families coming together, sharing stories, laughing, and even apologizing. It wasn't just about breaking down barriers. It was about rebuilding them brick by brick with each gesture, each word, each moment of humility. He wasn't sure what tomorrow would bring or the day after that, but for now, Marcus knew that he had witnessed something rare. He had witnessed people, despite their differences, choosing to see one another, to truly see each other. That he thought was the spirit of Easter, not just rebirth, but reconciliation. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't clean, but it was real. And that was the kind of change that over time could heal even the deepest wounds. With that thought, Marcus let out a slow breath, feeling the weight of the day lift off his shoulders, replaced by something softer, something gentler. A hope that perhaps, just perhaps, the world could be different if only people would allow themselves to see beyond their differences and embrace the common humanity that connected them all. The days following the Easter celebration felt different, as if the city itself had inhaled deeply, ready to exhale something new. Marcus walked the streets of Harlem with a renewed sense of purpose, noticing the subtle changes in the way people interacted with each other. The tension that had once seemed inescapable now felt like a distant memory. The park, once a battleground of misunderstanding and cultural divides, had transformed into a symbol of potential. People smiled more, made eye contact longer, and offered greetings to strangers with a warmth that hadn't been there before. As Marcus sat at his favorite diner, sipping his coffee and watching the world go by, he couldn't help but reflect on how far they had come in such a short time. He thought about the people who had come together that day, black and white, old and young, sharing their experiences, learning from one another, and slowly, cautiously dismantling the walls they had built between themselves. There was still work to be done, of course. The cracks in the system weren't gone. They couldn't be erased in a single day or with a few kind words, but something had shifted. People were starting to listen, to understand. Marcus smiled as he thought back to Evelyn's words. The resurrection of Easter wasn't just about religious redemption. It was about rebirth on a communal level. It was about rebuilding trust, mending old wounds, and perhaps most importantly, about forging new connections where once there had only been division. The lesson had been hard, but it had been necessary, and Marcus felt, for the first time in a long time, that there was hope. That hope wasn't just a fleeting feeling, but a slow, burning fire that could sustain them. He couldn't forget the little girl who had offered him her Easter eggs, her innocent desire to make things right with no understanding of the weight carried by the day. Her simple gesture had been a reminder that change, no matter how small, could have profound effects. And as he looked around at the world he had always known, he saw potential where he hadn't before. Harlem was still Harlem, the music, the culture, the struggles, but it was also a place of healing, of growth, of people willing to make a difference. As Marcus stood up to leave the diner, he felt the weight of the day settle on him again. But it was a lighter weight, one that no longer felt oppressive. It was the weight of possibility, the weight of a community that had found common ground, even in the most unlikely of places. With each step he took back into the heart of Harlem, Marcus knew that the road ahead would be long, but the journey had already begun, and that was enough. Today, tomorrow, and every day after that, there would be moments, small, quiet, but powerful, when people chose to see each other, to truly see each other for who they were. That, Marcus thought, was the spirit of Easter. The spirit of renewal, of reconciliation, and of hope for a future where differences were celebrated, not feared. The future was uncertain, but for the first time Marcus believed it could be different. It could be better. And that was all he needed to move forward.